everyone, Mr. Lewis here, coming at you with another Unit 1 lecture for AP Human Geography. Today we're going to talk about sections 1.4, 1.6, and 1.7. We're going to skip 1.5, we're going to come back to that next time because it's super duper important, but our focus today is on these three sections, so let's get into it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about three different concepts within our introduction to geography as part of Unit 1. 1.4 is what we call spatial concepts, thinking throughout space among different places, locations, what are the relationships, the differences, similarities between those places. Section 1.5 is what we call human-environmental interaction, but again, we are going to come back to that with our next lecture, so don't worry about that one right now. Section 1.6 is called scales of analysis. As we look at maps and as we interact with those maps, especially on our phones, on our computers, things of that nature, the scale that we're using in that analysis can change a ton about the information that we're actually getting. Section 1.7 is what we call regional analysis, looking at different regions and how those regions or places or locations, and really we're talking about a broader area here of locations within a general region, how are they related to one another? So, 1.4, what can make a place unique? When we say the term place, we're talking about a specific point on a map, right? A specific place. And each place has different types of characteristics, and some are similar to other places, some are different. There could be all kinds of distinct characteristics for that one particular place that allow us to separate it from other places. So that could be broken down in a few ways. One is place name. Okay, place name, or what we call a toponym, that's the technical term for it, is simply the name of that location, that town, that city, that state, that country, whatever it might be. So in this particular map on this slide, we're looking at the eastern side of Lake Michigan here. So this is up in the state of Michigan, and as you look at some of these areas, Wyoming, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Muskegon, you might be able to start to draw a little bit of history from that, a little bit of knowledge just from the context. For example, both Muskegon and Kalamazoo are old Native American terms that both had something to do with water, and that makes sense, right? Being located near Lake Michigan. So Muskegon is essentially an Ottawa tribe term for swamp, which makes a lot of sense given where that location is. So toponyms can really tell us a lot about that place and its history. A site itself means the physical characteristics. So as we look at a place like Muskegon or Kalamazoo, they're right next to this giant lake, this huge body of water. That is one physical characteristic that we could use to identify these areas of Lake Michigan. For Crown Point, for example, if you were in another country, you wouldn't say you were from Crown Point because no one's going to know what that is. But if you said near Chicago, for example, that would be using situation. It's a location relative to other places. If you were to say Crown Point is at the southern tip of Lake Michigan, that would be using physical characteristics as well as its situation to relative to Lake Michigan in that case. So there's a lot of different ways that we can identify different locations. And what we're doing there is we're thinking spatially, right? We're looking across different places, comparing, contrasting. But as places get farther away, they're less likely to be similar. Right? You think about the East Coast over in New York and the West Coast out in LA or something like that. Very different cultures that we're looking at there. And the reason for that is something that we call distance decay. Distance decay means the farther away you are, the less likely you are to interact and therefore diffuse to one another. To diffuse means to spread ideas or habits or other behaviors or practices. And we're going to look at that more in a second. Now, in the modern world, technology has eliminated a lot of that distance decay because we can easily interact with people halfway across the world and learn from them. So Korean pop, commonly called K-pop, is all over different parts of Asia as well as America now because technology has allowed us to diffuse instead of experiencing distance decay. Now, there's different types of diffusion that can occur. It happens all the time in classrooms, for example, in the hallways. As you see in the meme from Mean Girls down here, this girl says, "I saw Katie Heron wearing army pants and flip-flops, so I bought army pants and flip-flops." That is a perfect example of diffusion, simply copying what someone else is doing. But more seriously, some examples of diffusion in our world are religion. Religion's a great example, right? Every religion had to start somewhere and spread from that origin point. That's a great example of how diffusion can impact people's lives and their behaviors and their beliefs. So relocation diffusion is simply spreading through physical movement. So as people left different parts of what came to be Saudi Arabia after the beginning of Islam, okay, this was an example of diffusion. People were taking the Islamic faith and taking it out to different parts of Northern Africa, for example, different parts of the Middle East, and spreading their beliefs. That's an example of diffusion. Expansion diffusion is another type. It's the spreading from one place to another in an additive fashion. Meaning, for example, hierarchical. One person at the top of the food chain, a political leader, a national leader, a religious leader, starts some kind of trend, and everyone underneath them picks up that same behavior or belief, maybe adding in their own things as they go. Contagious diffusion just spreads like wildfire. Stimulus diffusion is similar, but stimulus diffusion is the spread of an underlying idea or behavior without every single detail that comes along with it. So we will talk about those different types of diffusions throughout the semester and throughout the entire year. So section 1.6, again, scales of analysis. When we look at these maps and when we're talking about different places compared to one another, the scale of the map can make a huge difference in that conversation because some maps are more zoomed in and some are more zoomed out. Now, the technical way to say that is some are on a larger scale or a smaller scale. Those scales, map scales, can be really represented in a few different ways. One is through a ratio or a fraction. So like 1 to 25,000, meaning one unit on the map is equal to 25,000 of those units in the real world, something of that nature. Written, they might just say 1 inch on this map is equal to 1 mile in the real world. Or on a bar line, like you can see right here, they're actually allowing you to measure this distance on the map, 0 to 1, would be 1 kilometer in the real world. So this is what we call scale, and every map has a different scale. All different maps have different scales, and it makes a big difference in how we're assessing that map and what kind of information we're getting from it. So as you look at this particular map shown in this animation here, as you zoom in on your phone, for example, you're looking at Google Maps, we're looking at the city of Los Angeles. As you zoom in, notice a lot of things are happening. First of all, we're moving to a larger scale. As we zoom in, that is a larger scale because the items on the map themselves, buildings, people, whatever, roads, they're actually becoming bigger as we zoom in. They're becoming more like they are in the real world. Not quite the same, but bigger, closer to what they are in real life. And also, as you zoom in, we're getting more detail, right? Los Angeles, the name itself fades away because we know we're in LA. We're zooming into LA. We already know we're there. So as that fades out, you get more specific things like road names, businesses. Here's Farmer Boys, whatever that is. So we get more detail as we zoom in. And we use this all the time, right? Scales of analysis are used in Google Maps to try and find restaurants, gas stations, airports, what have you. On Airbnb, people use it to find lodging or different tours that they can participate in when they're traveling. Uber, we use it to find rides or other ride services like Lyft, for example. So zooming in and out, we constantly do that, but we don't zoom in and say, oh, I need to change my scales of analysis on this map. We just zoom. So why does it matter? As we zoom in or out, we're going to get a massive difference in population, which means we're going to have different concentrations of businesses, of services, of people even, or more or less farmland, things like that. You're going to have different options for businesses. So if you're going to a restaurant, as you zoom out, you're going to get a lot more options, but you might have to travel a little bit further. So it's kind of weighing that cost benefit. We get more or less detail about a place as we zoom in or out. I can tell a lot as I start zooming into a place like Los Angeles. You're going to see the culture because the names of restaurants are going to come up. You're probably going to see a lot of churches and probably a lot of Catholic churches in a place like Southern California because the southwest part of the country is very heavily Christian and specifically Catholic because of the diffusion that came up from Central America and Mexico because of Spanish exploration there hundreds of years ago. So you can start to see how diffusion leads into all of these other items that we're talking about. Now, diversity is a big one because as we get into regional analysis, which is our last section for this lecture, 1.7, as you zoom out on a map, you're going to get a lot of different regions, right? And those regions are going to take on very, very different behaviors, different cultures. They look different. The food is different. Everything is different about these various regions. Even within one country, such as the United States, you can still have many different regions, as we know. And, one example of that is on The Office when Andy shows how to do some accents.
You sound like Forrest Gump.
I do not.
Well, you do, actually. You got this kind of like Florida panhandle thing going, whereas what you really want is more of a Savannah accent, which is more like molasses just sort of spilling out of his mouth.
So what's funny about that is he's totally right. Those accents are very different, but when you hear the places he's talking about, he says Savannah. Savannah's over here, okay, in Georgia, on the east coast of Georgia. The Florida Panhandle is just right here. So these are really in the same region if we're looking at the southeast, but very different cultures. Even though they're close, these cultures and these places are very, very different. And some of the reasons for that might be the history, right? Georgia was first settled by English settlers, whereas the Florida Panhandle was Spanish settlers. And so all the things that come with that, different beliefs, different languages, different accents, can lead to the regions and regional differences that we have today. So this is what we call the cultural landscape. A region gets its character through this cultural landscape. That could represent physical features, it could be cultural features, it could be religious, it could be language. When you go outside and you see street signs that are written in English or French or Spanish or whatever it might be, that immediately tells you something about that region through the cultural landscape. So there's a few different technical types of regions. One is what we call a formal region. It's very uniform, very homogeneous, meaning everyone is very similar in terms of language. The climate's similar all around. The religious beliefs are fairly similar. Oftentimes in a nation state, you experience a formal type of region, but we're going to get into that later in the year. A functional region is sometimes called nodal because it's focused around a specific point, a focal point, or what we call a node. So you kind of think of it as like a circular region built around a particular area. That's kind of how I like to think of it. And then, of course, a vernacular region. An example of a vernacular region is like Chinatown in Chicago. It's seen as existing as a part of a cultural identity. There's this shared history of the region. So that would be one example. There are many examples of what we call a vernacular or perceptual region all around the country. And it's always an interesting thing because you do experience in a lot of ways the cultural identity of those places when you go there, when you visit. That's it for sections 1.4, 1.6, and 1.7. Tune in for section 1.5, and that'll be it for Unit 1. Almost done. Just make sure you're following up with any activities, assignments that your teacher's asking you to do to go with these sections. and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks.